Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Chris Weidenbar, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Flight Lieutenant Guri Singh. We're honoured to acknowledge members of the United States military who are currently visiting Australia to participate in the Australian Defence Force's inaugural Gender Advisor course. We welcome the members of the Naval Association of Australia, and as always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. We also welcome members of the 28th Battalion and 225 Army Cadet Unit from Murwillumbah, Taree. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. Please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved. And here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for over a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember Engine Room Artificer 4th Class Robert Henry Hill and the ship's company of HMAS Sydney, who were lost after engaging the German surface raider Cormoran in 1941. Robert Henry Hill was born on the 28th of November 1914 in northern Edwardstown, a southern suburb of Adelaide, South Australia. He was one of 3 children born to Harry and Alice Hill. In August 1916, when Robert was 1 year old, his father Harry enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force. Harry Hill served on the Western Front in an infantry battalion and was killed in action in Belgium in late September 1917. After Harry Hill's death, his widow Alice and her children moved to Clarence Park. Robert Hill grew up in the inner southern suburb, and he became a member of the Intermediate Legacy Club of Adelaide. After leaving school, he was employed by the Municipal Transways Trust. Following the outbreak of war, the 25-year-old enlisted in the Royal Australian Navy in March 1940. He was posted to HMAS Cerberus, the Navy's training establishment some 70 kilometers south of Melbourne, on Hans Inlet, Western Port Bay, as an acting engine room artificer 4th class. A month later, he was rated as an ordinary seaman. In September, he was posted to HMAS Sydney towards the end of the cruise's celebrated tour in the Mediterranean. The pride of Royal Australian Navy, Sydney was a modified Leander-class cruiser armed with 8 6-inch guns. The cruiser was built in England and commissioned into the Royal Australian Navy in 1935. During much of 1941, Sydney was engaged in escort duties off the Australian coast, taking the cruiser to Netherlands, East Indies, Singapore, as well as Noumea, Auckland, and Suva, before returning to Western Australian waters. In late June, Hill was promoted to Engine Room Artificer 4th class. On the 19th of November, Sydney was steaming back to Fremantle, having escorted a troop ship part of the way to Singapore. At about 4 p.m., the cruiser spotted a suspicious merchant ship and decided to investigate. By 5:30 p.m., Sydney had almost drawn alongside the vessel, which revealed itself to be a German raider. Hoisting the German naval ensign, Cormoran opened fire with its guns and fired torpedoes. Its first salvo slammed into Sydney's bridge. The Australian cruiser returned fire, but Cormoran's second and third salvos hit Sydney's bridge and amidships. The cruiser's 3 main turrets, A, B, and Y, were soon out of action, but X turret kept up fast and accurate fire that hit the raider's funnel and engine room. Sydney, in turn, was hit by a torpedo between A and B turrets. Mortally damaged and ablaze, Sydney turned away from the raider, but continued to fight using its secondary armament and torpedoes. Cormoran was also burning. At 6:25 p.m., its captain gave the orders to abandon ship. As the German sailors evacuated their stricken vessel, they watched the Australian cruiser, now only a distant glow on the dark horizon, disappear into the night. By midnight, Sydney was gone, lost with all hands, 645 men in all, including Hill. He was 26 years old. Robert Henry Hill is commemorated on the Plymouth Naval Memorial in Britain. His name is also listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among some 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War, including his younger brother, Flight Sergeant Ronald James Hill, who was killed serving in the Air Force in April 1943. His photo is displayed this evening beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Engine Room Artificer 4th Class Robert Henry Hill, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They have no grave but the cruel sea, no flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, fast on the ocean bed. They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man, lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub of Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they'll be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you a very good evening.